My name is Allison. I've always been really active, always been working out, exercising, biking, hiking, all the things. My back it just literally felt like it was stuck and took me a while to right myself. And so at that point, that was the first real big kind of symptom that I had. And I worked out 5 days a week. I did everything right. It felt like. And then to have this diagnosis it was beyond. I mean, I've never been so upset in my entire life. It's the first real big kind of symptom that I had was back pain. And so it kind of started to flare up after that, but I wasn't left, completely non-functional. I was still functional, but with just a lot of like achiness and pain. So December through the winter, I was still skiing. I was still working out. I was still traveling. Funny enough, skiing, it felt better doing anything. Like skiing was the easiest thing. But it just started to get worse and worse until May of 2023 when I had a huge flare up of pain. I was doing PT at that point. I was doing chiropractic work. I hadn't gone to the doctor because I was an otherwise very healthy person, always doing all of my, yearly scans and that sort of thing for mammograms, that sort of stuff. So I didn't really go to the doctor thinking this was just purely like a muscular type of thing. So May of 2023, I had a huge flare up of pain where my husband had to carry me to the bathroom one night, and that was kind of the time when we thought something really is wrong. I had this big flare up of pain. I was actually due for a appointment with the PT, and I called them and I was like, "Hey, I something's really wrong. Like I could barely get to the appointment." They did like a basic assessment and they're like, "It's something in your spine." And they're like, "You should just go to urgent care." So I went to urgent care. The x-ray showed I had a partial compression on my L4. And so they were thinking, okay, at this point, you might have a slip disc, but we're going to send you for further scans. So I went to get a CT, and this is purely of my back still. I got the CT within a couple days, went down to Salt Lake, and I had the CT results by that Friday. So it was the Friday before Mother's Day. And I read the results, and I have a background in the medical field. I'm not a doctor. I was a cochlear implant audiologist. I worked with patients, with surgeons and doctors, and I was pretty familiar with reading reports. I got the report back, immediately opened my chart results, read them, and I basically didn't understand a lot of what was happening in my spine, except for it said, possible metastatic disease, metastatic lesions. And I knew there were multiple throughout my spine at that point, and I was like, that was kind of like the worst moment of your life, essentially. And the urgent care doctor said, you need to go over, get an appointment, because at that point I had a PCP with a different organization, and she wanted me to get a PCP within this big university system. And that's aligned better with our insurance coverage anyways. And so she said, walk over right now and make an appointment to get your PCP, you need a quarterback in trying to figure out what's going on. And at that point I knew something was really bad. Like when I read metastatic lesions, I knew it was cancer, and I was it was the worst day of my life, and also the typical, and where you're just like, how could this even happen to me? I had no respiratory involvement leading up to this, so lung cancer was never on the forefront of my mind ever. I went on to have further chest CTs with contrast, MRIs, eventually a brain scan, and then a PET scan when I got to the university hospital. And so it was within a couple of weeks, I would say by early June, let's see, I had a biopsy on May 30th. By June 7th, I knew it was lung cancer and adenocarcinoma. And they sent the rest of my tissue and samples for next generation sequencing testing, or biomarker testing is another way to describe it. And the biomarker testing was going to tell us if I had any actionable mutations. And I didn't really know a lot about any of that at that point. I just knew that if I had a mutation, that was better. By the 15th of June, I had my first oncology appointment. I had a radiation oncology appointment. And I was told on that day, so June 15th, that I had ALK positive. ALK positive, what's called a fusion, essentially. The technical term is it's a fusion, but you're considered ALK positive with this genetic mutation. Adenocarcinoma is the histology of the tissue, the disease. And then I was told I had tumors from my femur to my brain. And I had no idea, like absolutely no idea. The only symptom of my leg, knowing that there was a tumor, was the day we walked in. I had this like weird sensation. I was like, huh, that's kind of weird. Never hurt. So the first appointment was with the radiation team. They were amazing. They were like, do you know you have a tumor in your femur? And I was like, nope. They're like, well, we're concerned it's at risk of fracture because of the size of the tumor. Had no idea. So, and they were actually the ones that told me I had the ALK mutation. And I went on to see the medical oncology team, and they kind of explained the genetic mutation, how it's common in more in healthy, otherwise healthy, non-smoking individuals, and more so found common in women. Um, and so that kind of started, just my relationship with that medical oncology team, and started the beginning of my like learning about what this is, lung cancer, how anyone with lungs can get lung cancer, because I'm not a smoker. And many people who have the same mutation like I do, or with these actionable genetic mutations, are not smokers. Once I kind of got the full diagnosis and like the um the extent of the disease, and how, I remember reading my report originally. I had so many lesions in my bones that it was called innumerable mets in my bones, like so many mets throughout my body. I mean, I was beside myself. I couldn't even, after the doctor's appointment, I was in the car with my husband and my sister, and I was crying uncontrollably. Like I couldn't even believe like the state of like what my body was in. And being this patient now with the like cancer, like it never crossed my mind ever. I mean, I've always been the one that was like eating healthy. My mom was kind of a hippie, and we lived in the Bay Area. That was always my inclination, was to eat organic and try to feed the kids less processed foods and all of those things. And I worked out 5 days a week. I did everything right. It felt like, and then to have this diagnosis it was beyond. I mean, I've never been so upset in my entire life. And just, I think that day we were in shock. We were like all in shock for a while, my sister included, because she's like, besides my husband, she's my best friend. And we shared similar genetics, like similar, mindsets of life and how to live. And I think we were all in shock, complete shock. Because the doctor had said, if you didn't have this mutation, she's like, I would have been walking you down the hall to the hospital and checking you in for chemotherapy, and you might not have left. You might have had a year. And I was like, wow. Like, to go from, literally, I was just in Oregon the month before, traveling and helping my sister with an event, and I was in Colorado skiing with my daughter a month before that. Like it was beyond to consider that was actually what was happening in my body. So yeah, shock, disbelief. I mean, it wasn't confusion because I understood it could happen, but I didn't think it would be me. I am lucky to know so many people in this community. I do a lot of volunteer work. I'm involved in a lot of philanthropies in town. All like I have my foot in a lot of different organizations in the town, and I absolutely love that. But that was a point when I was having a really hard time because I didn't want the world to know, but yet I knew so many people. And then I was trying to figure out how do I control the narrative for myself to be able to talk about it when I'm ready. So initially it was like my sister, and she came out from, she would come out and stay with us. My husband, obviously we told my immediate family, we told my parents, but when we knew a little bit more information, we didn't want to like shock them, but we wanted to have enough information so we could say, this is what's happening. This is the treatment. So they knew. And then I had a core, probably 5 friends in town. And kind of refer to them as like my inner circle. They were my first inner circle. And they were the only people that I was like texting and telling. I would say, I just had the procedure, we're waiting on the results. Like, so they knew. So I had about 5 or 6, and they were my go-to people. If you ask anyone, especially my husband, I'm an A type, like through and through. And so I did a little bit of research. Like when I was first diagnosed with adenocarcinoma, I did know I had mutation, and I looked at the stats. If you Google it, don't ever Google anything ever. Anything. It was awful. It was literally like I'm going to die in like a year. And so I was like, I'm done. I'm done doing research. I cut myself off. I fully cut myself off. And I let my sister and my husband kind of be in charge of just getting the information and feeding it to me as I needed to know. I kind of had that same approach for the first 2 years with like reading my scans. I completely freaked myself out by reading my first scan. It was like traumatizing. So I would not read a scan until I had seen the doctor or was in the room with the doctor so they could explain things to me, because I had completely traumatized myself. So the information and messaging to our friends and family, once I found out I was ALK positive, I feel like the narrative changed. It completely changed. Like if you go onto their website, it even says it's like we are working together to drive research to improve outcomes and to create a situation where this type of cancer is just like living with a chronic illness. It's not like you're stricken with cancer and you're going to be in bed the rest of your life and you're done. And so my sister read that, and she was like, read this, and this is the information we send to our friends and family, and we say, there's hope. There isn't a cure, but there's treatment, and there could be a longevity in that, and there are people, smart people, working on trying to develop ways to make this type of cancer a chronic kind of condition. So that did change. I mean, it took me a long, long time to work through the emotions, the grief, depression, because I wasn't able to move my body in the way I wanted to for a while because my back was technically broken. We found out. A diagnosis, they said, well, your L4 is broken. It's not just compressed. There's a lesion in there and it's created instability. And so I had actually broken my back and I didn't really know. Just kept going. And so there was a lot of time spent once I got on treatment. Just my body was healing, but I wasn't quite myself. And for me as a mom, as a really involved person in the community, like I was the giver. I was the person helping people. Someone had a crisis. I was making their food. I was not ever the recipient of any of this. So it was a huge mindset shift for me in terms of like, I have to be accepting of help, of people, of I have to be the one accepting the help right now and the support. And I had my friends driving me around for a while because I was taking all these heavy duty pain meds, and I was so in shock for like a month. I felt incapable of like functioning really very well. Like my kids were here and they were fine, and we had a lot of family in town, but I wasn't myself. And this gal was amazing, and she came to my house. She came to my house, and we sat out on my back porch like every week. And I would just like cried, and I felt all the things, and I worked through everything. And I saw her for about a year and a half, pretty consistently, because it started to be less and less. But I had never really, seen a therapist, or, felt like I needed one. But my friends were like, nope, this is what you're doing. Here you go. And I was like, okay. Like at that point, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was so anxious. I was overcome with so much grief. I had lost like 10 pounds, which for me, I'm an eater. I'm an eator, and I do not like lose weight. And I lost 10 pounds. I was like nauseous. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I was so anxious. I had to take, all this medication just to try to calm myself down and sleep at night. And I was also in a lot of pain, and it was really strange. It was kind of right before I got in to see the doctor, but as soon as I had read that first report in May, strangely enough, every part of my body where I had a really large, met or lesion tumor started to hurt, and they hadn't hurt before. They hadn't hurt before. And by the time I went in to see my doctor mid-June, I couldn't sleep laying on my left side because I had so much pain on my left rib. And, it turns out I had a tumor there. Um, I was starting to feel pain right between my breasts, so like in my sternum. And I had a very large tumor there as well. My leg was fine. It was, we had a plan for treatment for my leg, but I was scared to walk up the street because I was scared I would break my leg walking. I was living in so much fear, but then I'm not, I actually kind of think in some ways my body, once my brain recognized, oh, you have cancer. So guess what? Just want to let you know you do have a little something going on, and my entire body started hurting. I was in so much pain some days. I was taking, like CBD, and I was taking Tylenol, like the max dose Tylenol you could, for weeks, because I didn't like being on the other really heavy stuff that was causing me to have like other issues, the side effects of the drugs for the pain, then you get these other weird things. So I was like, I had this, I remember looking back on my notes, I would take notes, of the meds, because I was in so much pain. I could barely function until I started the treatment with my medical oncology team. So it was a wild and terrible month or two before I got on my treatment and kind of gathered myself, if you way, of figuring out like I very quickly I realized, okay, I don't have this type of cancer where, I was really honestly, I was hoping it was something we could just chop off and move on. Do you know what I mean? Like cut it out and move on. But when you're stage 4 lung cancer patient, like the typical treatment right when you start is not to cut it out. Um, And I realized I'm going to have to figure out in my mindset, how do you live? How do you live with this? How do you live? How do you thrive? How do you continue living and thriving? I'm like, okay, I have to figure out in my life how to thrive with this type of cancer. And that was kind of like a big mindset change for me. I, live in an area where there is one major cancer center, and that is where, and it's really, really well known. And I had some friends work really hard to get me in really quickly to see the specialists. And so I felt really confident, to be honest, with that team and that group. And I think I was in so much pain. I was so non-functional. I had known people who had who've been treated at the center who had done really well. So my first, I think, step, my mind was like, I'm going to start here. And then once I'm stable, I'm going to look into second opinions. And luckily, through the ALK Positive organization, they have an entire like portfolio built in of like, here are all the experts across the world, mostly in the US, how to get in contact with them, what the process is. And so I kind of knew a lot of it would include travel. But I found one expert, and he's one of the leading experts in the world in ALK positive lung cancer, and he's in Colorado, and he did remote visits. So I did get a second opinion, and he continues to be the expert that I consult with. I think it's really important that you find a doctor that listens to you, to your goals, and then if you are acquiring information on your own and you have some ideas about treatment that you'd like to try or change in treatment or questions, and they're not receiving of that, then I think it is important to look to a second or a third or a fourth doctor. Don't feel, I think I think, I don't know. It's like when you have a hairstylist and you're like, I don't want to leave. I love her. I've been with her for 10 years. It's like, no, no, no. Like doctors are used to it. And most good doctors are not going to be offended that you go talk to someone else. And so it's so cliche. It's like, I wish I could say it in a different way. It's so cliche. It's so stupid, but you really do have to be your biggest advocate because, um, while our doctors are so smart and they're so talented, unless your doctor, for like what I have, it's pretty rare. It's only 4% of lung cancers. Unless they're studying and researching your ALK all day, every day, they're probably not reading as much research as you. If you are, as a patient, are in the forums, you're in the Facebook groups, you're reading all the research that's coming out, you're talking to other patients. Oh, hey, you're on this drug, you've got that side effect, you do this. Oh, hey, can I try this? Being your biggest advocate, and then if you have ideas about, treatment of your side effects, and you bring it to your team and they're not receiving of that, then I do think it is worth a discussion to change. And sometimes it means travel. Sometimes you can do something where you have like a local team that will do some of your basic stuff, and then you can consult, quarterly or yearly with the experts. It's important, I think, to be your biggest advocate.